Welcome to AI GovCast. In March, the Army announced Project ARIA to harness AI to modernize Army operations and to empower soldiers. With me today is Gabe Chiulli. He is the Army CTO for the CIO. He joins me now to talk about Project ARIA and how it's approaching AI innovation and how it's shifting the ways that the Army implements artificial intelligence. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Ross. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on here today. Definitely really excited to talk through what we're doing here in the Army. You've seen kind of throughout the last the last year, the drive towards getting AI as an enabling capability and really driving it to be more than just enabling and being a kind of proactive kind of thing that we do. You've seen kind of different announcements in the news about how, AI is a strategic asset. AI is, driving how we are making our changes. And Project ARIA definitely represents how the Army took its first initiatives to really get after getting AI really developed into the workflows of our day-to-day operations.
Well, I know that's been a big talking point from not just the services and from the Pentagon, but also from the White House and all of the administration. Obviously, it's not specific to this administration. This has been the driving thing the last few years. How are you getting the AI into the hands of soldiers? Because I know it's easy to talk big. It's not as easy to actually get it into the workforce. So how is Project ARIA making that happen?
Yeah, Ross, I think you hit a note, right? I don't know that anybody really thinks through the scale when we talk about AI inside the Army, right? Like we're talking, up to almost 2 million people at any given point that we have to try and empower. And there's ways to do it that'd be very expensive, and there's ways to do that we have to be kind of cost effective in how we implement AI, right? So Project ARIA really looked at, actually, just to give you a little history, the reason why Project ARIA kind of conceptualized, right? About almost a year ago now, I'll say more like 6-9 months ago, the Secretary of the Army, looking at all these initiatives, the Secretary of the Army actually did this TTX where we looked at really hard problem areas inside the Army. We brought in the top 10 global leaders in artificial intelligence and asked them to help look at these problem areas with us from an outsider view, right? Like, hey, if I looked at someone else's company, everybody's always got that way to look at something from a different light, right? So we brought these leaders in from across those big AI companies. We said, hey, take a look at us and help us see ourselves, right? And in order to see ourselves, we're talking, anything from logistics to how the Army actually kind of operates, policy, different pieces. So how can we look at it from that holistic level? And then in the CIO office, one of my jobs is being the chief technology officer for the CIO. And looking at how we deliver AI to the end user, right? We kind of looked at it in 3 different troves, I'll call it. We've got the end user experience type of capability, low barrier to entry kind of utilization, the Army Enterprise LLM workspace. That's like one very low barrier to entry kind of thing. You type in your question, you get a response, and that's kind of like that experience. Then you got the middle tier, I'll call it, which is we got a lot of SaaS capabilities and PaaS capabilities. And as we look at those capabilities, they generally start to bring on more and more AI-enabled tools within them. Think of all your different workflow automation tools out there in the SaaS world, right? They all have their little nuance of how they enable AI into your workflows. And then on the far right, I call it the very unique deliberate AI for very deliberate problems, where I use this analogy. It's probably terrible, but I'm going to continue to use it because I think it's great. It's like you make an AI algorithm that can spot drones and -40 degrees in Texas. Like it's got a very specific job, and its job is to only detect it during that one very specific condition. It's a small little AI model, and it's really meant to do that stuff. And I call it the very unique building of models and more R&D faceted type of things, where you actually have to know the mathematics, the Python code, the whatever it might be that backs the model, versus the far left, which is user interacts with AI, that explosion that made ChatGPT very, very, very easy to use, which was people actually be able to interact with AI on a very easy basis. We're trying to now gap those two things, right? How do you make it so someone can do something like that ChatGPT experience all the way to actually satisfying that requirement on the far right side. So when we talk about scale at the Army size, it really takes a different kind of approach. And what Project ARIA did was to say, what are those big gap areas that we have? And I'm not sure if you're tracking the different team colors and what they're going after. And if we're going to go through that, well, I'll let you get after that part of the question.
I can, yeah. I'm actually curious as to how you chose the problem sets that were chosen for the gray team, the black team, the yellow team, all that stuff. Like how did you like choose that and hone in on PPB automation, supply chain prediction, and model delivery?
I want to say it's kind of a compilation of literally industry looking at us and us describing part of our problem areas, right? Like when you, I used this kind of topic a couple of days ago when I was talking to an industry member about talking about having a lot of agents inside their network. And I said, when we look at a lot of agents, sometimes that having multiple agents, having a lot of agents is actually an indicator or a problem in some areas. Why do we have so many agents that do a lot of input-output operations? If realistically you need one agent that can actually, like you actually need to kind of discover why you're doing those different processes. And so that analogy kind of relates back to, we had industry come in and look at our problem areas that we said, hey, these are kind of some hard areas. We brought in a bunch of users from the Army community warfighters and said, here's some of the things that are really challenging us. How we do logistics. How do we see ourselves inside of a logistics platform? How do we know what we're doing from a logistics side? And we kind of templatize that in a way that was digestible for these AI leaders. And that was kind of the feedback we got with some of these big areas of saying, like, look, you guys can really excel in this. You have all the infrastructure, if you will, to do these things. And this is going to help push you forward in how you deliver, capability out to the Army and the warfighter much faster. And here's how we apply AI to that same kind of problem set inside the greater, commercial world, if you will.
So within that, I want to pick a little bit on how industry is involved in the partnership process looks like within Project ARIA, because there's obviously a ton of feedback, not just from the industry side of things, but to your point, from the warfighter side. How is that feedback loop working? How is the Army moving that forward for AI implementation? Throughout the service.
And are you specifically talking really with how we initiated and working a Project ARIA?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to pick on one kind of in particular and just walk the dog on it. And maybe it'll help kind of, or maybe one or two. They're kind of very different. I mean, they're all very different AI projects, which is really cool. Right. And I get to kind of oversee a lot of it from a high level CIO kind of level, which has been exciting. So Project Black, for example, it's about how do we do edge-based AI processing, right? There's kind of little intricate areas where they've been solved in some form or fashion. Like I'll use an example is like Android phones and iPhones, they have like a little kind of bit of AI built into them. Like you got, like I'll say it's like the initial trove into how do I make AI available to everybody in the world? That's what they're solving, right? And like that's a hard problem to solve, is make AI useful to everyone. The good thing is we have very specific problem areas that we can apply AI to. So when we look at AI and deliver, we say, hey, these companies are already doing this. We just now need to figure out how to focus this and get it tailored down to really Army problem areas. So when I kind of think through that problem set, it's like, how do I take a model hub, something that I know authoritatively, what are my different models that I have available to me throughout the Army, right? A place where people can register those models in a authoritative way. Hey, this is the model that can detect drones in negative 30-degree weather in Texas. You've made that the authoritative model to that, and then make it so that model can be deployed on any hardware seamlessly without having to go through I'll say the blueprint process of being like, okay, do I have Linux or Mac? Do I have or Windows? Do I have what kind of GPUs? Like we are now working on the process to say, here's the type of equipment, because Army has a MTO of what its equipment looks like. Here's the type of MTO that this model will be deployed to. You click a button and that model will automatically deploy onto that MTO equipment that the units are delivered as part of their day-to-day operations, and make it so that model will effectively work inside that process. So that kind of like, if we take it to the left a little bit, is working with industry that have worked on those different enclaves and different domain areas of expertise, right? The very, very unique mobile phone sort of, I say mobile phone, but device, mobile, that operating environment. And then the higher level operating environments like the cloud and everything in between about meshing and all that.
I want to talk about administrative burdens and how um, that's kind of a promise of Project ARIA is reducing those. I know that's something that everyone hates, and that's part of why AI is so valuable to people is the tedium of stuff. So how is that? What are the use cases or any sort of measurable things that you're seeing that you're working on so that things are easier on the administrative burden side for soldiers and Army staff members?
Yeah, there's a couple different areas. So the first thing I will say is Project Aria was the DUSA, Mr. Fitzgerald, definitely like his number one thing was as we went into this, we said like we want to move fast. There's no slowness to the process of going through identifying the projects and getting actions done in kind of real time, right? So part of this is like really seeing ourselves from how did we acquire, how did we do that sort of administrivia, right? Like everything from the teammates to the process of bringing them on to getting all the administrative of bringing contractors onto network and putting something onto the network that we can really demonstrate back to the leadership. So part of this is even looking at those processes and seeing how can we help figure out where we can help accelerate things that'll automate the acceleration process, whether it's the onboarding process to our network. So it's all part of what I call in the holistic bucket of how the Army runs, right? When we want to be able to say, hey, I want to reallocate funds from this project to that project, the Army didn't have a very unique way to be able to go and ask the question, like verbally ask the question, hey, if I take, this activity over here, Project A, and I want to defund that and actually apply it to Project B, how does that mechanically work? And inside the Army, that used to be a 6 to 9 month process, right? Because they have to go through, look at all the budget lines, go through all these different processes to be able to dig all that information out. And now it's more or less a query, right? Like you're going through and you're asking the question and you're saying, okay, I want to be able to do this and be able to get a simulation in real time on those type of activities. In addition to that, I think, from an administrative kind of process perspective, the AI tools are being used to help supplement just day-to-day activities of saying, here's different workflows that we have to have people go out. And I'll just use the example of people have to go out to the inventory lots every, couple hours or a couple days to go check on something. Well, if we put sensors in place and we put AI behind them, can those sensors now just keep us up to date versus us having to send out, me and the Army CIO, Mr. Garcia, we say we do the Mandrolic process, which is humans have to go do the activity, or can we leverage AI to go do those Mandrolic activities?
Modernization. I know that this has been a major point of emphasis for every agency, every part of government, and certainly within the Pentagon. How does Project ARIA fit within the Pentagon's broader modernization efforts, and specifically the broader AI implementation?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting from like what I just said earlier when I first started is the Secretary of the Army saying AI is a strategic asset. I think you've seen that up and down from the different EOs, what the Sec War has directed, get after it, use the AI. Let's make it as commercial experience as possible and how we leverage AI tools and capabilities throughout our processes. I think a lot of it has to do with that kind of cleared the runway for us, right? Now I can move fast towards getting after those really, really good objectives of using AI in our day-to-day activities. So, I mean, you've seen, I want to say at least 2 or 3 different EOs alone that address this. There's at least 2 or 3 Sec War directives, like get AI into your processes. If you're in the way, I will remove that person that's in your way, right? And we have taken that wholeheartedly and moved out of the Army. I'd say that much. So I call that kind of seeing ourselves as like, what is that process that we've made that's blocked AI implementation in the Army? One of the really good things is I'm also one of the authorizing officials in the Army. So as I saw stuff, I'm like, I can't be the blocker to this stuff. I am one of the guys that's kind of one of the release figures. So it's good to be able to see ourselves throughout the processes and understand how do we want to govern it? Because from a governance perspective, we also don't want to, I'll call it, bankrupt ourselves in that process, right? Because AI can be very expensive as well. And so that process has been very good for us to walk through and then do it at speed of what a corporate company or commercial entity would do it at.
To that point, I know this conversation is always when we talk about software, new systems, that kind of stuff. Speed is paramount, of course, but how do you balance that with security, and how is Project ARIA sort of working with that dichotomy to get AI into the hands of like I said, of staff members?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? So AI, there's been different takes on how to approach AI throughout, I'll call it, different iterations of time. When AI things like ChatGPT first came out, I think the big gut reaction from everybody is like, "Don't trust it." That was like a lot of. I mean, there's definitely like a lot of things I say you can't trust about it, right? But like there was like the big initial reaction, and it was kind of like block it everywhere, don't trust it. It's gonna give false pretenses or whatever it might be. And then there's from my side, and this is where I've kind of taken a very different approach, and we have in the Army CIO office is like I think we originally had always looked at it as that intern that you don't know that you just hired, and you kind of have to understand what its limits are upfront, and look at it more from a cybersecurity perspective. So we actively literally went to go do the process of getting models brought on from an authorization perspective, and not necessarily from, is the model super accurate, is it, all those different features, because that's always going to improve, and they iterate with new models so often it's hard for us to even keep up with it, right? But from a cybersecurity perspective, getting them put into places where we have trustworthy storage, trustworthy processing of those AI models, and making it so we can easily connect our different systems to those AI models as necessary, right? So I do think our approach has been more about empowering local commanders, local units, local organizations within the Army to make that risk decision of, hey, if this model, if it answers you incorrectly, is the risk something that's actually within the risk appetite, and not trying to headquarters make that decision across the entire Army, right? Because I think at our level, we're saying units are empowered to make that decision. Hey, it may be such a non-trivial answer that comes out of the bot, whether it says yes or no is indifferent. They just need to make sure that something's acknowledging.
I want to end on that word just because it has been the word of the last 12 months. Is the Pentagon is changing, and the military services are changing their relationship with risk. How is Project ARIA moving that forward?
We are trying to, I think, what would be the best way to describe it? I think the best way I would describe it is we are trying to say, let us understand the risk, and let us take that risk and really delegate it down as much as we can to the people that are actually taking the risk, right? A lot of times what was happening previously is, and this is across the board, is like risk tolerance was always decided at such a high level that the person that's implementing never had a say in whether the risk was within his realm or whatever like that. So a bit of this is actually delegating that risk, not say authority, but that risk tolerance reduction piece down that comes with education, right? So I think within the Army, we've done, oh my God, probably every week for the last, almost year at this point, a weekly lunch and learn on just using AI in general. And that's to help communicate, like, here's AI, here's what it can do, here's use cases you can use it in, here's other repeat customers. Guys, go rinse and repeat your own use cases to help empower yourselves. Project ARIA, what it definitely helped us do was take a look at these big areas in the Army of seeing ourselves, and help us figure out, when we talk about something like logistics, originally we're always trying to figure out, okay, is there this really specific logistics model out there? And it's like, no, you know what? We can tailor these models to be very specific towards different problem areas inside of this. And we need to be able to delegate risk down to that commander that's doing his logistics problem inside, like Yellowstone, for example, and be like, hey, AMC, this is your problem area. You are the owner. You're the official on this capability. Who am I to say that thing is not giving you an accurate enough answer, right? And so I think that's been a big driver of this stuff, is really taking that realization that from a cybersecurity perspective, we 100% want to be clean on how we deploy and have these different services. But after that, I think it's really that delegation down to the different people, the actual, we call them trail bosses in a lot of cases. And that term is meant to represent that person that has the full encompassing, lead on the actual activity. And so that trail boss that's in charge of those different efforts, the Yellowstone, Black, and HTAR Team Gray, those trail bosses are the ones that are really making that risk determination versus from the other way around. So I think that actually really helped drive the decision space to a much shorter gap.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big movement forward on the risk side of things and making those determinations. Gabe, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks so much for talking with me about Project ARIA.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me.